Our next speaker is Erik Mahan. Erik has had a long, winding career, which includes being a sushi chef, a Peace Corps volunteer, a commercial diver, and a real estate agent. Since applying to Scripps, he has been committed to developing skills to be able to make seafood more sustainable for people around the world. To that end, he began an internship at NOAA's Southwest Fisheries Science Center, where he's assisted in experiments and learned about fish husbandry, and his Capstone research project is focused on the seafood supply chain. His internship has led to his Sussman Fellowship this summer, in which he'll be analyzing the relationship between physiology and energetics in a selection of fish species, and potentially participating in NOAA's research cruise on the RV Reuben Lasker, assuming it proceeds as scheduled. For today, the title of Erik's presentation is Seafood is Off the Chain. How do we implement blockchain technology for seafood traceability?
Red snapper is one of the most notoriously mislabeled fish in America. There's a couple reasons for this. One reason could be a translation error. The Japanese word madai refers to sea bream, but in sushi restaurants across America, it almost exclusively refers to red snapper. Another reason is that it's kind of hard to identify. Now, if you're a chef in the Gulf and you are in the mood for red snapper and you happen to catch a lane snapper, you probably won't be that mad. They're both very similar fish. Not only do they look alike, but they cook similarly. They've both got white, flaky flesh, and they're both good for frying or blackening, and it probably doesn't matter that much. However, if you're a conservationist, that issue of mislabeling has a few more consequences, considering how threatened the species, the population of red snapper is. In 2009, a number of Florida restaurants were found to be serving catfish instead of grouper. This could be an issue of mistaken identity as well, but there's a financial component here as well. A restaurant that could convince their customers that they were eating grouper, even though they were eating catfish, stood to make a lot of money, because catfish costs more than 4 times the price of, or grouper costs 4 times the price of catfish. A number of studies have looked at this issue of food fraud. We've already discussed species substitution, but a number of studies have looked at this issue of food fraud, and they might focus on different areas. Some have focused on sushi bars, and some have focused on choice species. But what's clear is that food fraudulence pervades the seafood supply chain. We've already spoken about species substitution, but there's also issues of modern-day slavery and animal welfare as well. For my Capstone project, I wanted to look at this issue of food fraudulence. So I wrote a business plan for a company called DocChain. I'm really excited to tell you about it, but first, we have to talk about the seafood supply chain, as well as blockchain technology. Now, the seafood supply chain, at its heart, only requires 2 supply chain actors, a harvester and a consumer. Without either of them, we don't have a supply chain. And in this diagram, a fish will be caught at the point of harvest on the left, and it'll move right towards the point of consumption. Now, let's make this a little bit more realistic. Let's say that we have caught a 200-pound tuna, so it's going to get a little bit bigger. Well, the harvester can catch it, but he's going to have trouble finding someone to buy it, because no one wants to buy a 200-pound tuna for dinner. So we have to involve a processor now, who's going to break it down and deliver it to multiple people. Zooming out, we might have something like this. And a fish's journey might happen like this, where it's picked up at the point of harvest, it's landed on a vessel, it's taken to a primary processor, put in cold storage for a couple hours, couple days, couple months, taken on a plane and delivered to some sort of middleman who will take it to a restaurant where it'll be broken down further and cooked and delivered to consumers. That's a very standard path through the supply chain. Now I want to pause here and talk about something called a key data element, or KDE. When the fish is picked up and it's harvested by the boat, it's tagged. And that tag is going to have all sorts of important information. And that information reveals a lot about that fish. For example, a tuna that's caught by Longline is going to be better for sushi, whereas tuna caught by purse seine is going to be better for canning. But it also goes past that. With stuff like the vessel information and location of the harvest, we can actually tell whether the fish is illegal. So what I'm trying to say here is that KDs are important because with them, we can determine whether a fish is legal or illegal. I went to the store last week, and I just took a picture of some salmon, and you'll see that a couple KDs actually make it to the end consumer. Over here in the circle, you'll see the common name, whether it was farmed or wild caught, and the country of origin, or at least the most recent country of origin. Now, I want to take this information and bring it back to the seafood supply chain. Because now we can think about how fraudulence enters the seafood supply chain. So, as I discussed earlier, a fish can be illegal before it even enters the boat. Let's say it's caught in an MPA. It's not available to catch. So that boat can still catch it, but if they just lie about the documents, then it'll still make it into the supply chain, where people like you and me can eat it. It goes past that, though, because it's not just there. If the boat practices seafood slavery, then that would make the fish illegal. But those boats that practice that seafood slavery still have ways to launder their seafood into the seafood supply chain. What I'm trying to show here is that seafood can become illegal anywhere in the seafood supply chain. And it might look like the same thing to you and me, but at the end of the day, we shouldn't be eating fraudulent fish, nor should we be feeding it to our pet cat in the form of cat food. And I want to talk about one case study, because in 2012, a sushi restaurant in Santa Monica, California, only a couple hours north of here, was found to be serving sei whale meat to its customers. So I wanted to take this last example and talk about how a sei whale, the flesh of a sei whale, could end up in California. Well, sei whales are threatened, and fishing for whales is illegal in most places, Japan not being one of them. However, this was actually caught in Japan by a Japanese vessel, so it was totally legal. When it was taken to a processor, it was still legal. It wasn't illegal until that processor conspired with the importer in America, forged the documents to say that it was bluefin tuna, and then sent it on an airplane. The importer picked it up from the airplane, picked up the bluefin tuna, took it to a restaurant, where the sushi chefs at the restaurant told their consumers it was bluefin tuna and fed their consumers. I want to take a moment here to talk about blockchain technology. A blockchain is essentially a computer network in which one node on the network will submit an algorithm that all the other computers will have to verify through consensus protocol. Once we have a piece of information that's verified through that process, consensus protocol, it's encrypted and it's uploaded as a block onto the blockchain. This blockchain is essentially a digital ledger. And that digital ledger, all these pieces of information connect to the prior and preceding blocks, which don't necessarily have to be connected. These blocks can have any sorts of information. It can also have transaction info. But what's important here is that it's immutable and it's add-only. So if you try to tamper with one single block in the chain, because it's cryptographically linked to the preceding and prior blocks, you can't. It's one of the most secure forms of digital data management we have. Now, what happens if we take this blockchain technology and put it on the seafood supply chain? Well, we might have our seafood supply chain, and then we've got a whole digital element as well. And with blockchain technology, we can actually merge a lot of technologies together. It's called the Internet of Technologies. But using sensors such as like those on buoys or on docks and stuff, we can actually take natural data about the environment and upload it to the blockchain before the fish is even caught. However, when we do have a fish, that fish can be caught, and that boat can upload that tag digitally to the blockchain. So that digital tag is now going to actually follow our asset. So that means that when that boat lands it at the processor will have to check it against that tag to confirm that it's the same asset. And if it is, then everything is square and they can move on. You can also incorporate other you can also incorporate other technologies such as cloud technology and smart contracts in order to handle administrative processes and transportation. However, when it's off the plane, the other processor can actually verify against that digital tag to make sure there was no tampering on the plane and can confirm that it's the same asset. They can also take a physical barcode and print it onto something to follow along that fish in reality so someone else down the line can confirm everything. Now, hypothetically, if any fraudulence has occurred, then one of these downstream actors will be able to detect it by checking the digital tag. This is what blockchain represents. It's real-time auditing. However, we know that that's not going to happen here. So they can actually pay via blockchain using cryptocurrency, and the fish will end up with the consumer who can use their phone on that QR code to scan the entire thing and see the entire journey. So how do we get people to buy in? Well, that's what I looked at for my project for blockchain. And here's how I see it. Most companies that offer blockchain to the seafood supply chain do it as a service. And that means that a fish might be caught, but then all the supply chain actors will actually have to send their information to a third-party company. And then when it's delivered to the consumer, that third-party company provides that information to the consumer. However, that also requires that those parties on the supply chain pay a fee and the consumer pay a premium. So I wanted to integrate blockchain technology into the supply chain. So that means that blockchain is actually filling the role of a processor. And so when a harvester catches their fish, blockchain will actually pay for the fish as well as the associated data tag. And we would print out the QR code onto napkins, which we deliver to consumers in order for them to see the journey of the fish, in order to bring consumers and harvesters together. Now, there is an elephant in the room. The coronavirus has absolutely devastated the seafood industry, and it's hard to see how it's going to come back, especially since restaurants are one of the most common places where people eat seafood. However, if there's one thing that's been proven, it's that people are dedicated to eating seafood. People want to eat seafood even if they can't eat it in restaurants. And getting into the seafood industry right now is not a problem. However, another thing happened. Because of COVID, people have realized the importance of blockchain technology and how important it is to have secure supply chains. So I would just like you to leave everyone with this thought about how blockchain can secure our supply chains for the future. Thank you. And I'd like to thank so many people, my whole Capstone committee, everyone from Scripps, including Samantha and Risa, my whole cohort. My whole Capstone committee was awesome. Dr. Mark Jacobson is amazing. Dr. Sarah McDonald and Bubba Cook are super cool. And I have so many people to thank who helped me with this project and answered my questions, but I have to thank Shannon, my wife, who helped me every single day.
Thanks, Erik. So we've got some live questions coming in. The first one is from Hilly Hicks from Virginia. He's an alum of the MAS program. He asks, how do you plan on incentivizing fisher folk to buy into blockchain technology? And what sort of regulatory barriers do you predict to encounter?
So there's two questions there. How do we incentivize people? Well, we incentivize them with plain old money. As I discussed, blockchain buys the data as well as the fish, and that data is going to cost money. Right? In my business plan, it costs about 15 cents per round weight pound per fish, but that could depend on fishery. The second question is regulations, and that's a lot more complicated. The regulatory landscape for blockchain is basically a Wild West right now. But it's changing. I'm going to use China as an example because they're a little bit more concrete in what they've said. But in 2017, China completely banned all cryptocurrency trading But as recently as last year, they have started to digitize the yuan into a cryptocurrency. So the tide is changing. It's not there yet, but it might be soon.
Great. I also want to mention to you, pass along, that Kate Wing is watching, and she gave you kudos for your animated split chain and voiceover. So that's high praise from Kate. So I wanted to make sure you heard that. We've got another question from Hannah from New York, another MAS grad, who says, what incentives do participants in the supply chain have to participate if they're benefiting from illegal activity?
That's a really good question. They would not buy in, to be honest. And that's not exactly a problem. Because if we can get let's say we've got good fishermen and bad fishermen. If we can get all the good fishermen to buy into a program like blockchain, then it's pretty obvious who the bad fishermen are. And then all the good fishermen, the blockchain technology would actually prevent them from any fraudulent activities.
Great. And finally, related question, sort of. Sarah from San Diego wants to know, how can blockchain technology address the commingling of legally caught and illegally caught products that are processed together?
Yeah, so this is an issue of chain of custody, and that is an issue in pretty much every type of certification. Blockchain technology there is an issue where if you've got one 100-pound tuna, it could theoretically be switched out for another 100-pound tuna. However, at the end of the day, you've got the same net number of fraud. The blockchain isn't preventing any, but it's also not adding any.